Hey, you're watching Software Agents TV. Stand by for our next video.
Hey everybody, A2 Gonzalez from Software Agents here today. And today we're interviewing voice actress Kira Buckland, kind of a mentor to me and some other people. You might know her from such media as Jojo's Parts 4 and 6, Blue Exorcist, Yokai Watch Season 3, I believe, Dead or Alive,
I'm giving this all I got.
Nier Automata.
Right.
Plenty of others that aren't coming to me, but yeah.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Demon Slayer, Genshin Impact. Those are probably some of the ones that people might know at the moment if they're familiar with any of them.
I assume that a lot of you are familiar with Kira's work, so we wanted to try a few questions that may not get asked very often today. Kalene wanted to know, what's it like having that conversation with your parents? I want to be a voice actor. You know, is it difficult? Because, that may not be the career path that people think is the safe one.
I think it definitely depends on everybody's individual situation and their relationships with their family. I feel very fortunate to have parents who were ultimately supportive of what I wanted to do. But I think, any parent is going to have a concern if somebody wants to go into show business or anything in that related field that, it's not a very stable source of income. And, just families want to know that you're going to be able to support yourself and not have to rely on them forever. So, I think that's kind of a valid concern that can come up. I decided I wanted to go into some sort of entertaining at age 12 because I wanted to be a singer originally, and that was not a super realistic career path, which I can totally admit now. So, that was kind of a thing where they're like, okay, you want to be in a rock band? That's cool, but probably not the best way to make a living or whatever. And then, I know being an actor is kind of up there in terms of things that are difficult to make a living in. But because I was willing to have other jobs and kind of have backup plans, I think that made things a little easier too, because realistically speaking, most people are not going to make a living as an actor right off the bat. I certainly didn't. I had lots of other jobs for years and years and years. And then, I think it was a lot easier for people to be supportive as they saw that I was actually making income over time doing it. It's different for everybody, but I think a lot of parents are going to be concerned just because, I think people want their kids to be happy, but you're also I don't want you to not be able to support yourself or to not be able to live a reasonable lifestyle or whatever. So, but obviously I know, again, because it's different for every situation, I know some people have had instances where they had really strict parents who demanded they go into a certain field or whatever. I'm fortunate that that was not the case for me, but I know that that's a very real concern that some actors have had to deal with.
A user who goes by the name of Oreo wanted to know if you had any high school or college theater training specifically.
Yeah, in high school I took drama classes. It was mostly kind of the, we play improv games or whatever, which I was never very good at. I auditioned for a couple plays, but I didn't get anything. And also I had taken some classes like that as a kid, community theater, whatever, because I just knew I liked performing, but I didn't know exactly what field I wanted to perform in. So I kind of liked acting and I liked singing, and then voice acting, when I discovered it later in high school, was the best of both worlds because it's performing vocally. And then the thing that I think really helped me, the first acting class where I really felt I had some sort of breakthrough, was the acting class that I took in college, because the professor I had at the time was she really kind of went into her theory on how you get into character and get into the headspace of what your character's thinking and what your character's doing, because some of the methods that I had maybe heard about before and stuff like that didn't really resonate with me, but just kind of the way that this professor explained it to me was very I don't know, it was just kind of something really came to mind, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And she was the one, I think everybody early on when they want to go into voice acting have some sort of mentor that tells, really drills it into them, okay, that's great that you can do different voices, but it's about the acting. And she was kind of that person to drive that home for me. So she really kind of made me think about how to break down a character. She would have us do these, I think it was worksheets even, where it's we break down a character and stuff. And obviously when you're voice acting, in a practical real world setting, like you're cold reading, you don't really get a lot of time to like dive into the character aside from the director just giving you a rundown of who your character is, what's going on in the scene and the project. But doing those exercises when you're still learning to act, I think is really helpful, because that way when you get auditions later from an agency or a roster or whatever, it really helps you to kind of break down quickly in your head, like, how am I going to approach this character in these lines?
I don't know if you're aware of this. I studied theater when I was in high school. I went to a vocational high school. So my minor was theater. Nice. And I had this idea. I'm like, I'm going to do combine acting and technology because my major was computer science. And it's really important to learn the basics of that, because like a lot of cartoons or anime or video games, they can be broken into simple and classic components that have been consistent with storytelling for a long time. So they're very old tools to work with.
Yeah, and understanding archetypes is really helpful. I mean, I always try to tell people if I'm directing them on demos and things like that, that yes, you have to look at every character as being a three-dimensional being, and even if for some reason they're not written that way, what can you do as an actor to sort of like find in the depths somewhere something you can make them three-dimensional with? But understanding like the tropes and archetypes, I think really does help have a good baseline for how to play a character.
My friend Michelle Baker wanted to know what's the difference between preparing for an anime role and a video game role.
Well, in both cases, a lot of times you're not going to know what's going on until you get in the booth. I mean, sometimes with anime, the Japanese version will be available prior to the dub, and, maybe if you're lucky, you might get a chance to, like, check out an episode or something if you happen to have whatever streaming service it's on. But the big differences in terms of kind of how the sessions are conducted is obviously that for anime, you are matching everything to the existing video. So a lot of your performance choices and things like that are naturally going to be constrained by timing. And it can be challenging, I think, even for experienced actors if they're working in dubs for like the first time, because it's like, pacing is it's like a really integral part of kind of how you deliver lines for a character. And yes, the lines are adapted to fit the mouth, but if you're just not used to that, like if you maybe talk naturally faster or slower for this character, you have to be able to replicate that performance you gave. But, it's got to go a little quicker. It's got to drag out a little more. You have to add this hitch in the middle because the mouth closed there or whatever. So it is very, very technical. And I would say, both anime and video games are technical in their own right, but anime naturally tends to be more technical because everything is so timing based. And then video games, sometimes you still have to match timing, like if there's cutscenes or just anything where the player, like the dialogue advances automatically rather than the player advancing it.
I surveyed the entire factory, but couldn't find anything resembling our target.
Maybe they, moved it somewhere?
A lot of times you kind of have to stick close to timing of the original language. So, but I would say in general, like with games, I think there's a little more room to play, at least with the internal timing, as long as you're not like dubbing to cutscene where it has to match exactly. I think there's a perception that video games are more vocally stressful. And that can be the case, but not always. I mean, my most vocally stressful sessions ever were like doing Jojo, because you're fighting all these enemies, you're getting like ripped apart, set on fire, all this kind of stuff. So it's a lot of screaming and stuff. And in games, yeah, you might have battle callouts, but sometimes, like especially in JRPGs, they're not like really brutal, like getting limbs torn off, It's just sort of like, ha! Ha! Like swinging a sword and getting hit and dodging and stuff like that. So both can have like battle efforts, but in anime, those are going to show up as part of the story. Like, your character goes to fight somebody and then you dub the battle scene. Whereas in a game, usually that's a whole separate tab on the spreadsheet. So you'll maybe do all your story dialogue first, and then you'll go into the battle spreadsheet and record all those lines.
Yeah, and for those not aware, a lot of the scripts for video games, especially ones with tremendous amounts of dialogue and what have you, it's all pretty much on an Excel sheet. It's not like a screenplay or a playbook or something like that.
Yeah, and sometimes you might only see your lines on the sheet, like if it's a really long script and they kind of have to filter it. I always like to know what I'm responding to. I think that's like really crucial as an actor, that you know what you're responding to. Like they even have a saying, acting is reacting. So if for some reason you don't see the line prior to yours, then usually the director can read you in or at least tell you like what you're reacting to, because super important. But it's very rare that I work on something that's in like traditional script format, like a play or a show or something. It's usually all in like an Excel spreadsheet that's going to be on a screen in the booth that you're looking at.
Yeah, from what I often see, paper scripts have gone out the window and it's not really done.
Yeah, it's very rare that I see it these days, because I mean, it's a waste of trees for one, and also because, especially in something like dubbing, lines have to be rewritten fairly frequently for timing. So it used to be like, because, you know, I've been doing this for a while, and so I was there in the early days when it was more like paper scripts that were common, but it's like you had to have a pencil in the booth and you'd like cross out, like the director would make a rewrite and you're like crossing things out, and it's just like, it's time consuming. So usually what they have now is like, there'll be a screen in the booth that's like connected to the director's laptop, and then if they have to rewrite a line for timing, it'll show up on your screen in real time. And that's really nice because you don't have to worry about remembering the rewrite or putting it in yourself or whatever.
An individual who simply goes by Candid asks, what does Jojo's mean to you? And further adds, is this Jojo's? I guess before we get into that, we would actually, behind us we have the Dreamcast game, which
ooh, nice. That's a good one. That's a fun game.
Yeah, that was actually my first exposure to JoJo's. Well, the arcade version of that.
Nice.
And then we also have I have part 3 here as well. So we get the shrine going in the background.
Yeah, I got a JoJo shrine too. A lot of it happened from before I even worked on the show. But yeah, I mean, what JoJo's means to me, JoJo's is my favorite series of all time. I am caught up on the manga, you know, part 9 is just starting to come out, so I've been really enjoying what that is so far. I can't wait to see more of what happens. And yeah, it's like just a really special franchise to me. I don't even know, like, if you ask me to explain, like, well, why do you like JoJo so much? It's like, I can't like explain in a logical manner why I like it that much, but it's just really interesting and unique, and there's so many cool music references and there's so many character designs that really stand out, and it goes through all these different, you know, it's like, yeah, there's big action sequences with muscular dudes beating each other up, but there's also like a lot of feels and emotional moments, and it makes you think about things. And I don't know, I just think it's a beautifully written story in every part.
Yeah, as I said, my first exposure did come from the Capcom arcade game. And I thought that was just like, it was a very cool and strange Capcom game. And then later,
you're like, what the heck is this? Like dropping a steamroller on people? What are these things that come out behind them? And why is this bird fighting?
I got a little bit more into it with the recent anime series because the manga wasn't available in the United States for the longest time, or it was incomplete. And I had thought that it just might be something I would never experience. I didn't care much for the old OVA. I didn't really feel super great about it. But I thought the recent TV series, I've enjoyed most of it from what I've seen. I still haven't finished it. I need to finish it.
Oh, definitely. But I know JoJo's is long. Like, you know, it's not like as long as One Piece or something like that, but it's pretty long.
My friend Christy wants to know, you've been studying Japanese for many years. Has there been a time where you've been able to apply that knowledge for a project?
Absolutely. You know, I don't think it's necessary by any means, because obviously, like, I work on projects that are localized from other languages too. I do a ton of Chinese games. I mean, I try to teach myself like bare bones, like basics to try to, just understand a little bit more of like pronunciation and things like that. I've worked on Korean projects, French projects, all sorts of things, but working on so much anime and stuff, I do find it helpful just because for me, it sort of gives that layer of additional context. Usually, we're previewing every line in Japanese before we record it, not only to check timing, but also to kind of see what the actor's intent in the original language was. And when you know what they're saying, even to some degree, I'm not fluent, but like I know a decent amount. I don't know, I feel like it's a little bit easier for me to kind of, in that split moment, dissect like how they're delivering the line and what they're saying, because I don't know, it's like you can hear the tones even if you don't understand the language, but it just makes it just gives like a better picture and added context, I guess. And it helps, like, I'm not like stressing over name pronunciations. I mean, it's still, the challenge is that you're not always going to pronounce things the traditional way. So sometimes my mind really wants to go to like the most like correct pronunciation, but sometimes, just to, because obviously the cast has to be consistent, they might do something that makes it a little bit easier for American audience to say. So like, for example, just to go with something everybody knows, like Naruto is like what I want to say, right? But like Naruto is the more slightly Americanized version. So if I were hypothetically working on something like that, I might have to remind myself every so often, like, oh yeah, don't tap the R's, Naruto.
At least we can all agree that Naruto is totally wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad to see that there's more care being paid overall these days to, just making sure that pronunciations are somewhat correct and stuff.
When anime dubs were becoming a little bit more mainstream, I want to say about 22 years ago, around the time where I'm about middle school or about to enter middle school. Some of the shows, they're either very Americanized or they're trying to keep things Japanese just enough, but they're a little bit nervous to fully commit because I think they might think that the audience might not understand it and it might alienate them. And just nowadays, I think everybody's just letting loose.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's always going to be a balance to some extent. Like if a joke or something is clearly like so culturally ingrained that it has to be adapted, then yeah, it's fine to like adapt things as long as you're keeping the spirit of the original. Obviously you don't want to like, in terms of keeping certain words in the original language, like obviously you don't want something like the meme with the translator's note, Nakama means friend or whatever. But, there's certain things like maybe names of certain foods and stuff that I have been seeing, like we can leave it in a little bit more. We can say like onigiri now instead of rice balls in a lot of shows and things like that, because even if the audience doesn't happen to know it by its original name, it's like, well, they see what it is on the screen or whatever. So, and you don't really see like names being changed too much anymore or things like that. So I think it is really important to try to keep things like culturally in there when you can, but I'm not in the camp of we need to keep honorifics in shows and dubs. Like it wouldn't bother me if a dub wanted to use honorifics. I know like Fooly Cooly originally, which I consider like one of the greatest English dubs of all time, like they left in a lot of honorifics and I think it totally worked and it made sense and everything. But, I get why it would be jarring maybe for a lot of dubs to do that because American audiences just aren't used to that. And if you're, localizing in English, like I totally get like both sides. But, I think as long as you're like trying to keep respectful towards the source material, that's the important thing.
Speaking of Japan, Dabney wants to know, when you were in Japan, what were the arcades like over there?
Really cool. I mean, we only went to a couple, but it was fun. I played DDR there.
Sam went to a Japanese-style arcade in Colorado. I'm not sure where in Colorado, fairly recently. And the pictures were quite extraordinary.
The fighting game machines are really good.
They're not impossible to find in the US, but I just from my experience, I have to travel a little bit usually to find those.
Yeah, in California we have, well, this is a national chain, but I don't think all states have it. We have Round One, and they have like a lot of Japanese arcade cabinets for fighting games. And that's another thing too, just, practical experience where reading Japanese can help, because sometimes the text is all in Japanese in these machines. So I'm like, cool, I can select the thing that I need.
Daniel Tang wants to know that you're known for being a fan and a talent. Has prior fandom knowledge such as Jojo's, Inuyasha, Soul Calibur, Ace Attorney helped you in a project that you were cast in?
Well, sure. I think it helped in a sense, like, no one's going to cast somebody in a role just because they like that project or whatever. I'm just going to get that myth out of the way right now. But, being familiar with the characters in the universe and things like that can help you approach the audition. Like, it could give you an edge in the sense that the style of the project, the media. Like, let's say, for example, I don't know, just Ace Attorney, to use an example. So if somebody wasn't familiar with the games at all, they might think like, okay, I'm going to approach this like courtroom lawyer drama on TV or something. Whereas, like a very serious tone wouldn't work like that because the games are known for being so absurd and over the top.
You won't be reviving anyone today!
And so coming from someone who has played all those games or whatever, it's like, oh, well, I know the style of this game. I know who this character is, that sort of thing. So when I got cast in Genshin, I knew what the game was. I thought the character designs were cool, but like I'd never played it personally. But, and now I'm addicted to it, long story short. But, so it's like, you don't even necessarily have to like be a fan of something, but if just like the general style of media, like if you're auditioning for a JRPG, even if you don't know that particular JRPG, or maybe it's not even out yet, if you just kind of know like, okay, let's say this is like a Fire Emblem-esque kind of game, and you're just sort of familiar with that style, things like that are really helpful. And I think that's partly why the up-and-coming generation of actors tends to be so strong, is because it's like they live and breathe this media. So if they work on, if they audition for a video game, they're not like, what's a video game? Most of the time, it's like, like a lot of them either play games or watch someone on Twitch or YouTube play games, or they have a sibling or family member that plays games or whatever. So it's like, I don't know, people are just surrounded by this kind of media. And then, of course, the generational thing happens on the other end, too, because sometimes I'll get auditions where the reference is like, sound kind of like this TikTok influencer. And I'm like, I have no clue what this is. It's too Gen Z for me.
I mean, to add to that, something that I think people should be cautious of, I don't think I've really seen this in a few years, is that sometimes your fandom, some of your biases might potentially color an approach to your approach to a project in a way that isn't really helpful to the overall project. Like, gotta be careful with my words here. Someone might be, I don't know, I want to be in the new Star Wars, and they might think that knowing all the aliens and the planets and what have you makes for a better performance, and maybe that may not work that way. Or maybe it might be something like a character in a piece, them being kind of like ignorant of the goings of the overplot is kind of like the point of the character, and kind of having all these like preconceived notions of how that piece of media might work, it might negatively affect that performance.
Sure. I think you don't want to get too married to like, this would be my interpretation of the character, because with any project, it's very, very important to be adaptable to what the director and the clients want. So, obviously it's kind of like, it can help you to have all that context and to know this and that, but to be flexible and to understand that, things may be changed, things may be localized a certain way. You may be asked to do certain things with like the character that maybe weren't like what you had originally envisioned or whatever, but you have to trust that everything's going to work together and make a great project. I mean, I feel very fortunate that when I worked on Jojo, we had a few different directors, but the main director that I worked with for most of the project was like really collaborative. Like, he knew that I knew the series, and he was like, open to, here and there if I was like, oh, this particular line feels just really out of character. Can we just change it to this or whatever? But, also as an actor, like, I'd be careful. Like, I don't want to overstep that because as an actor, my job is to do my job, not to be a consultant or a writer or whatever, unless you're specifically asked to do those things. So, so it's kind of funny because I remember I saw like someone on Twitter saying like, if she was such a fan of Jojo, she should have pushed back against the localized stand names. I'm like, bro, like that's copyright law. I don't have any control over that, nor does anyone on production. Like, wouldn't we rather have Jojo in the US with censored names that are funny and meme wise anyway than not have Jojo at all? Because, so it's funny sometimes that people think that actors have some degree of control over like the story and writing. And it's like, no.
MrTopTenList from such YouTube channels as MrTopTenList wants to know, it's known that besides voicing for fighting games, Kira is a fan of fighting games. Does Kira main any of the characters she's voiced?
Oh yeah, it's kind of like my rule that if I voice a character in a game, I'm going to main them. But I'm trying to think if there's like specific other characters that I really enjoy. So my first main in Soul Calibur long before I ever worked on the game was Taki. Because I really like rushdown characters in general. But of course now I main Talim and secondary 2B because it's like, well, I'm two characters in this game now.
Proposal. Dispatch it as swiftly as possible.
You don't say.
May the wind watch over me.
And, well, in Street Fighter 5, I main Falk, obviously.
Let's begin.
But in Street Fighter 4, I main Zangief. And a big part of why I mained him was just because my friend was like, you keep rushing in and like, getting destroyed. And so you need to play a character that's going to force you to be patient and block more. I was like, okay. Plus, I don't know. It's just funny. Like, I'm going to pick this big wrestler dude or whatever. In BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, you have to have like a team of two characters. So, I mean, of course, I play Heart from Arcana Heart because that's my girl. But, I don't know. I also really like playing like BlazBlue Central Fiction. So sometimes I'll pick like Noelle or Mai or somebody I like to use in that game. Or I'll pick Hyde because he's voiced by Colin McCarley. So it's like, 2B and 9S sort of on a team.
9S.
What is it, ma'am?
Stop calling me ma'am.
Huh?
Or I'll pick Merkava because I just love like the idea of this alien-looking dude with the big stretchy arms, or Susanoo because he looks like a giant Ava. Like, I don't know. I'll sometimes like try different characters.
I have Dead or Alive 6 right here.
Oh yeah, of course. Honoka is always going to be very special to me. I mean, I don't meet a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I liked you in Dead or Alive, or I play, I think a lot of people play the game in Japanese, which is totally fine. But I like Honoka is always going to be really special to me because she was my first playable character I voiced in a fighting game, and that was like my biggest career dream of all time.
Actually, we have Arcana Heart over here, but this was the older one.
Yeah.
The one I'm more.
It'd be so cool, like if they ever dubbed an Arcana Heart game and I got to voice Heart again. That would be really fun.
Sam wanted to know, what are your top 3 fighting games?
Guilty Gear. Like, if I had to pick one specifically, probably Accent Core, because I put a lot of hours into that back in the day. Soul Calibur. I mean, of course, I like Soul Calibur 6, but Soul Calibur 2 is like a classic. That was like the first fighting game that I really got into. And Meltyblood. I think Meltyblood is always the odd one out because there's always memes about how like people would bring it to Evo and play on monitors set up in the bathroom, and it's like the more janky your Meltyblood setup is, the better. It's kind of like how the meme or lore went around it. One thing that people always ask is like, okay, now that you got your dream role of Jolene, if you could be any other existing character's English voice, who'd it be? And of course, I'd say like Dizzy from Guilty Gear. I mean, I kind of doubt that'll happen realistically because, the industry is so competitive. So if she ever gets like an English voice or whatever, I know it's probably not going to be me, and I'm trying to make peace with that, of course, but that would be fun.
For me, Guilty Gear and Meltyblood were things that kind of existed a little bit peripherally. because a lot of my friends growing up, they liked Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, but those games, like, they would be at conventions and get-togethers, but they were never the main event. They were something that was just kind of huddled in a little corner on the side, but they've developed followings in, I want to say, the past decade or so.
I actually really like 2D air dash style fighters in general. Like it wasn't practical for many reasons, but I wanted to make my own fighting game. I even had like a concept and characters for it and everything, and it was definitely going to be that style.
More people plot fighting games than you think. I mean, MrTopTenList, some of his videos, he comes up with ideas like, what if this was a fighting game, and then he proposes movesets.
Nice.
A lot of people, if they had the time and money, would make video games, I would think.
Yeah, it's just like that's a huge thing, is that it costs so much. Like when I was like, oh, well, maybe I could like crowdfund my idea for a fighting game. I talked to a friend who actually did crowdfund and develop his own game, and he's like, yeah, so let me give you a breakdown of like how much we made and how little that actually is when it comes to hiring programmers and artists and animators. I was like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, and me and Sam, we have talked to people who have worked on video games. It's kind of what we do on this channel. And they've made it clear that it's historically always been a very tough business. Just in terms of the amount of hours that get put into any project and maintenance and funding things.
Yeah, and then even just like the balancing and coming up with every single moveset for every character, like it's a lot, It's like ideally like my role in developing, if I could come up with somehow like to make my game idea reality that I've had for a gazillion years. Like I would love if I could just kind of be like, I guess, the creative director, like come up with, here are the concepts for the characters, and here's like a brief overview of how they would fight, and some examples of other characters that might be sort of similar that you could use as a reference, and then I'd want to like cast and direct the voices for all the characters. But I mean, I feel like that's what everyone wants to do, right? Everyone wants to be the ideas guy, and just like I come up with something and then everyone else does the work. So it's like I'm fully aware that it's like, yeah, you want to do like the easiest part.
I mean, that's what being a project director is, basically.
Yeah, but then you either have to like, have a team hire you on in that role, or have a lot of money to make it happen.
Somebody who goes by PSI Pizza Omega says that you lead a busy life. How do you make it work? Do you have a routine? Do you have a strategy?
Suffer and cry. I mean, I guess like the more practical version, because I'm definitely in the midst of that right now. It does kind of fluctuate as an actor. Like I have some weeks where I'm like, I cannot even like function. I am so busy. And then others where it's like, okay, this is a little more chill. I can, do stuff or whatever. But it took a long time to get to that point. Like it's like years and years of you're just trying to get the ball rolling, just trying to get feelers out there, trying to get more work. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, all those things kind of come to fruition, and you have existing projects that come back and need more work from you and stuff. And that's great. Like I never want to take that for granted. I'm always grateful for it. But it is really hard sometimes when it's like everyone constantly needs your time and you just don't have time or energy left. And especially now that, I'm doing so many conventions and I'm traveling a lot and all that. So Google Calendar is like a huge thing because it helps me just keep track of exactly when I'm booked and when I'm able to be available. You have to be on top of email and see like, okay, well, this place needs my avail, so let me give that to them, and then follow up if it changes a lot, if they don't book me right then. And, and sometimes I just have to like, I guess set like boundaries, like, like tell clients like, I'm sorry, I can't do 4 sessions in one day because it's going to like really wreck my voice. So can we move this to another day? And, it's like at the end of the day, if you're like, hey, I can't do this day, like the worst that they're going to do is be like, okay, sorry, we have to find someone else. And, most of the time that doesn't happen. And if it does, it's sort of like, okay, well, this wasn't meant to be for whatever reason. And if it's something that's like a huge priority, then it's like you can shift stuff and try to make it happen.
For me, I find that making daily, weekly, monthly, short-term goals is helpful.
Yeah, and sometimes my goal is just, I'm going to get through this week or whatever. And, it's really interesting. Like, I don't in any way want to diminish, I know that because I've been there for many, many years, the actors who are like, oh, I just want to work. I'm just like struggling to find work. And I totally have been on that side of things too. And, just want to provide the perspective that it's like, yeah, we all want to say we're busy nonstop, but that can be stressful. That can, like, especially during like 2020 and 2021 when conventions weren't happening and there was a lot of work being done from home because of the pandemic. It was like, it was cool to get to work from home sometimes and not have to like commute to studios and all that. But it was also really easy to get burned out because I would just be in my booth for like 6 to 8 hours a day and just like, working on thing after thing. And, sometimes you'll be working on stuff that's really cool. And other times you'll be like, this project is like not super artistically fulfilling or whatever. And it's just like, it becomes harder when you can't have that balance of, oh, I'm going to go to another state this week for a convention or something. So I don't know. It's a lot of like different things and complicated feelings to work through.
My writing partner, Rebecca, wanted to know, was there ever a time you came up with a voice and then you said to yourself, wow, I can do that?
I guess, like, I don't know, because I've always tried to pride myself on having a pretty big range. It's something that I focused on a lot, maybe too much early in my career. Probably would have been better if I focused more on the acting side starting out, but, whatever. So I get asked to do, like, a lot of utility and games and stuff where basically they just bring you in to play, like, a bunch of, like, NPCs and stuff like that, and sometimes I get asked to do things that I don't really think are in my wheelhouse. Like, I've definitely worked on projects where I had to play old ladies, which I really do not think is that I'm strong at by any means. But I'm like, all right, you brought me in for this project. I'm going to try my best. And, it's kind of like, I won't be offended if they recast me or whatever. But I think at least some of them made it into the it's in Final Fantasy VII Remake. You can find me as like 5 old ladies scattered around. But it's like, yeah, sometimes I just do something, or I just think of something weird that like, oh, maybe I heard an actor do this on SNL or something, or I don't know. Sometimes I'll just experiment with things and come up with something weird. And like, I don't know, I don't do a lot of like creature voices, but that's something I should probably explore a little bit more. And I don't do a lot of accents because I've never been strong with accents, but sometimes it's fun to just like put on a YouTube video and just try something for an audition that asks for it, just to see if I can do something halfway passable.
As an additional note, she says here, I wonder if she can do a German accent.
So I actually got coaching on a German accent once, because when I was doing Falk and Street Fighter, like there were certain things that they wanted to sound more German or whatever, but I was just like not good at it, so I'm kind of glad that they didn't end up going with that for the character.
Somebody from a pinball group I'm in who goes by the alias of Straight Shot wants to know, what should voice actors, both professional and amateur, be cognizant of in these COVID times?
Well, I guess like we're talking kind of specifically about in these COVID times, I see a lot of discourse going around where people are saying that it's no longer necessary to live somewhere like LA or Dallas if you want to be a voice actor. And there is like some truth to that. There are certain studios that are still kind of open to recording remotely and casting actors from wherever. And so, if you are able to have a really great setup where you are and you're at a competitive level, I think there is some work you can do. I know like for, I think like commercials and narration and stuff, there's more and more stuff being done from home. But in terms of character work, because I know that's what most people want to do, like anime video games and stuff, I mean, it is going to be a barrier if other talent are able to go on site and you're like, well, I have to record remote, because even if your setup is really good, it is extra time and money and work in post-production to match everybody together. So even now I'm seeing a lot of studios that are like, we either will not consider remote, you must be in person, or we maybe make an exception for remote, but you have to be like the best choice and we like you over all the other local actors. And You know, so it is kind of important to be realistic. Like, I mean, I would love it if I didn't have to live in LA. I make no secret of that. But it's also kind of like the reality is that my job is here and that more and more stuff is going back to in person. So I always tell people don't move before you're ready, but understand that, like, especially if you want to do anime and you want to do video games, a lot of that's going to be in LA. There is a lot of anime work in Dallas, Texas area with Crunchyroll and the Crunchy Funimation merger, but also, you know, obviously it doesn't guarantee anyone work just to move to a place. So that's why I say you got to be competitive first. And the nice thing about at least having a little bit more leeway for remote in these times is that some actors, I was literally just talking with an actor from New York about this earlier today, that you can sometimes get in with those few studios who are still allowing remote. And then once you build up some credits, then, you know, it's a little bit easier to try to make that move if you decide to.
I'm a little bit frustrated. I mean, the voiceover work that I've done hasn't been anime or video games. I do more like industrial videos and nonfiction.
Hey, it's work. But I get that, you know, sometimes you want to have that artistically fulfilling moment of like playing a character, of course.
Well, I that's kind of more the stuff I've done, not or narrating nonfiction. But I do feel for people who that's their career path. Like, I noticed that when remote options were more available, a lot of British voice actors were being in a lot of American productions, and they were just thinking, you know, I thought I may never have the opportunity. And now all of a sudden, British and Australia, maybe a few other places within the Anglosphere. And it seems like with certain studios who will remain unidentified that they're just saying, okay, back in person now, that those opportunities might get taken away from them, which kind of stinks.
Sure. And like, I totally understand, you know, because I've heard, of course, from people who work production side, and they're like, yeah, it's a lot of extra time and money to do remote, and we can't guarantee the quality is going to be up to par for our clients and things. So I get it from that perspective, but I do like it when, you know, even if they want to have most of the people recording on site, it's cool if at least for like a few characters, or like they're at least willing to consider, or especially if the character has like a certain ethnic or cultural background where it's like really important to represent that authentically. You know, I think there are situations where it should be considered, even if it's not kind of, oh, we can consider this for every character all the time. You know, and LA is a very diverse city and stuff like that. But I just feel like, especially when you have characters from different backgrounds, that it's cool if you actually consider maybe people from that region and things like that.
Last question on my sheet is from a user who goes by The World. I'm assuming that's I assume it's a Jojo's reference, but the avatar is a picture of the Earth, so it could go either way. They want to know, what is a piece of advice you wish someone told you when you were starting out?
This sounds very obvious, but I've told this to other people because it really makes you stop and think that, like, at the end of the day, being a good actor is like the most important thing you can do for your career. I know that sounds very basic, but it's kind of like, I think it's very easy when people are new to get hung up on things like, oh, I have to network, I have to grow my social media, I have to have like my branding and, you know, my this and this and that. And it's like, sure, that stuff is like, it can help, whatever. But the thing that's going to get you cast, the thing that's going to get you booked and called back and recommended to other places is not, you know, oh, how can I like get this person to like me or whatever. It's more like, are you really good? Because at the end of the day, if you go in and do a really good job, people are going to remember that, whether it's the clients you're working for, the voice director, whoever, you know. It's like, so then even just turning in really good auditions, like even if a casting director maybe doesn't have a part for you, or they submit you on something and the client doesn't pick you or whatever, they will remember if you consistently turn in great auditions, and that's going to lead to other opportunities that you may not even know about.
I guess something I see people do, sometimes it feels like they try to rush certain things, and then the results are not very good because of that.
Yeah. And that's why I wrote an article before. It's called Putting the Cart Before the Horse. And because one thing that I see all the time is people saying, I have no acting experience, I haven't really taken a class, I've never done a paid job, but how do I get an agent? And it's like, well, an agent is not going to take a chance on somebody with no experience, like in 99% of cases. I mean, it's like, if you were an agent, would you want to like sign on somebody who you basically had to like train from the ground up? Like, no, they don't have time for that. They want to sign people who are going to book and make the money. So it's kind of like, you have to do all your homework first. You have to train, you have to, get your demos done and get marketable in terms of like your skill and your demos and stuff like that. And you have to be good and then prove that you can book work on your own and do all that kind of stuff. And then you can start applying to agencies when you have that experience and training and a body of work behind you already and stuff like that. And even then it's still hard. So, it's like, I think a lot of people think that, oh, well, if I just get an agent or if I can just get an anime or whatever, then that'll open doors to success. And it's like, no, even if you somehow manage to get that one thing when you're new, that's no guarantee of continued work. And the best way to get more work is to just be really good at your job. It's not about like, getting involved in industry drama and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, just do your work, just be good and make people want to bring you back.
I guess one thing I wanted to know before we get out of here, there's a lot of great resources that you've provided through the Voice Acting Club, all kinds of articles and closed threads. Do you still do workshops?
I've got a few scheduled this year with Strawberry Hill. I wish I had more time to do them. It's like, it's very difficult because now that conventions are back in full swing and all that kind of stuff, I'm like traveling a lot of weeks and I don't often know when I'll be free in advance. So it's hard, but I'm trying to, do a couple. Like, in fact, another studio just hit me up about possibly doing like a weeknight class. So I'm going to see like, I don't know. It's like if somebody invites me to do a workshop, I do enjoy doing them mainly because people tell me that they found it helpful. Like I always said, when I first gave it a shot, I was like, if people don't find this helpful, like I never want someone to feel like they wasted their money or like they didn't learn something. So I was like, if people can come away from it finding something that they can use to help them going forward, then I will feel justified in doing it. And people have given me that feedback. So I don't know, that kind of gives me motivation to like, okay, I guess it's helpful to people.
One thing that I've really retained from the workshops, and Sam might hear this, I thought it was very useful when you're talking about breathing and supporting your voice with breath and to not be bashful about it. I think it was like some conversation where like when cutting recordings together, somebody was complaining about a bunch of like breaths between recordings, and you said you breathe when you talk, and I
you're
think about that a
human.
lot.
Breathing is a function you can do. That you can cut it out in post. It's like if you're gonna edit those audition lines together, no one has to hear your before you do your next battle yell or whatever. So it's like don't stress. And even like people get really self-conscious about messing up a line or whatever. It's like you can have the most experienced top talent in the business and they will still mess up lines because you're cold reading. Like it's normal to mess, if you're messing up every single line all the time, then okay, maybe it's a sign like you need to practice cold reading a little bit more on your own or, whatever. But it's like, don't stress about things that we do because we are normal humans.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I guess we should wrap this up, but did want to leave us with any final thoughts, statements?
Yeah, I just always recommend that if people have, they just want to know more about this stuff or whatever. We talked about this briefly in the interview, but I write tons and tons of free articles for the Voice Acting Club website, which is just voiceactingclub.com. And we also have a Discord server where you can join and ask questions to get, perspective from other people in the community. I don't always have time to answer things individually as much as I wish I did. So having, a community of other actors as a resource that you can go to and ask things, I think is really helpful. Also, just for a sense of like community and making friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for checking out our video interview with Kira Buckland, and thank you to everybody who contributed to this video. Hopefully you found it helpful and informative. And if you want to help us out, check out these fine links over here, or just stick around until the video runs out.